Bay Area to showcase their personal experiences on what it means to be a female that works in the sports industry, which I think we all know is a very male and frankly white male dominated industry. So I'm super excited to talk to you wonderful ladies. I'm your moderator, Kendra Andrews. I am a Golden State Warriors reporter for NBC Sports Bay Area. And so I guess we can just start out by everyone introducing themselves so the girls listening and young women listening know who they're hearing from. So Maria, why don't we start with you? Just give us a little intro on you.
Thanks, Kendra. Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Maria Valdoesa. I'm the Senior Director of Group Sales for Golden State. This is the start of my 12th season with the team. And I'm just so excited to be here alongside Dr. Patel and Jasmine and Kendra to talk about our experiences in the sports world. And hopefully some of what we say, resonates with all of you girls watching today. And so looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Jasmine, how about you next?
Thanks, Kendra. I'm Jasmine Villanueva. I'm the senior coordinator of the community relations team at the Warriors. I've been with the team for about 6 years now. It's been a whirlwind, and I'm so excited to be here alongside these amazing women.
Last but not least, Dr. Patel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Lena Patel. It's nice to meet all of you. And like what's already been said, I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today. I've been a team physician with the Santa Cruz Warriors for 4 seasons now, and I'm also a practicing family medicine and a sports medicine physician.
Awesome. So it's lots of different career paths, ground to cover. I think it's great to just show the variety within what women or just people can do in the sports industry, because sometimes you don't think about all of the different avenues there are to take. Before we jump into the questions that we have prepared, or I have prepared for our panelists, for all of our viewers and listeners, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen that we welcome you to ask your own questions, and we'll get to them at the end of this panel because it's super important to hear what's on your mind as the next wave of people who are going to be entering this industry. But just to start off, to talk just a little bit about, career paths, because as I said, all of us are in very different areas of this industry. So I want to know kind of how did you get here? And I'll open it up to all 3 of you. So whoever wants to start can lead us off, but just describe your career path for, how you got to where you are out of college. Did you go to grad school? What was your first job? How did you make it to your current position?
I can go first. So how did I get to this career? I went to the University of San Francisco for college. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and I just couldn't leave. And I think a big part of that was the community, the diversity of this area, and just, obviously a sense of comfortability. But while I was at USF, I studied business, organizational behavior, and leadership. And that kind of sparked, that interest sparked while I was in high school. I randomly decided to, as you're exploring what you want to study in college, a lot of us don't know what we want to do. I signed up for a business entrepreneurship competition. I was the only person from my school to attend. And then at the end of the day, I actually ended up winning first place in that entrepreneurship competition. So I was like, hey, business is something I'm kind of good at. Why don't I continue to pursue that? So I studied business in college. And then just to backtrack before college, I've always had this interest in working in sports, not necessarily being an athlete, a professional athlete, but I grew up really close to what used to be Oracle Arena. I can literally see the arena from my childhood home, the fireworks that went off there. And so there was something about it where I was like, I wonder how I could get there. How could I work there one day? And so since I want to say middle school, high school, I think I made it an internal goal of mine that I never really thought about, but that I'd want to work there. And so in college, it's kind of like, how do I get there? I would honestly while I was in class sometimes, look up opportunities that I qualified for. Being a full-time student, many of the internships in the sports industry were full-time. They were like 9 to 5s, and that just really didn't work with my school schedule. And I knew that I was a student first. So I would take up non-traditional forms of internships, part-time work, opportunities in the summer that were really part-time positions. But I started off with the Junior Giants program, with the San Francisco Giants, being a Junior Giants ambassador in San Leandro. And that really gave me an opportunity to lead an entire season of, I guess, kids baseball. And, you know, that also allowed me to figure out or understand that, you know, in sports, there was this field around community, community relations, community foundations. I learned that that was a department in sports teams or for sports teams. So that was really cool to learn at a young age. I think I was a sophomore in college when I had that gig. And then from then, I looked up other opportunities that I qualified for. After my Junior Giant stint in the summer, I was asked to come back to sort of intern during the postseason for the Giants as well during the 2014 World Series. And as you can imagine, that was so exciting to have the chance to witness a World Series live, be there for the win. And then I eventually found my way to the Warriors, where I had a stint as a part-time event staff. Again, this is all while I was in school. And the great thing about these positions is that they're flexible as a part-time role. They're flexible with my school schedule. I could really set up, I'm available these days or these times to work, and I still always prioritize school throughout the way. But as an event staff, I took advantage of meeting all of the different departments that had events or on game days. I spoke with a lot of different people who were full-time and did kind of the same thing that we're doing here. Ask questions of how they got to where they were. Did they go to grad school? Part of the reason why I went to USF is because I knew they had an amazing sports management program, which I know a lot of the viewers here are part of. And honestly, I am so envious because that's why I went there. I dreamed of going to be part of that program. And actually, I haven't had the chance to because I'm working right now. And one day I would love to get there. But honestly and intentionally went to USF for that reason. But yeah, just overall, just found my way to kind of stick with the Warriors for the past 6 years. I've witnessed and got to be a part of a few championships, including the one with the Giants. So I don't know, there might be some luck there, but it's been a ride for sure.
You can say, yeah, you're lucky. You can say that. Dr. Patel, why don't we go to you next? Kind of similar question, but obviously becoming a doctor, lots of school involved. How did you narrow down medicine in general to sports medicine and joining the Santa Cruz Warriors as their team doctor?
Definitely. Great question. So like you just said, the road to medicine is a long one. I think it was worth my while. You know, if you love what you do, then all those years of schooling, you kind of forget about it. So let me backtrack though a little bit. So, I mean, growing up, it was similar to Jasmine. And I played a lot of sports. I wasn't necessarily awesome at any one particular sport, but I liked a lot of different things. I played tennis mostly. So I did a lot of tennis through high school, but I had done a little basketball, a little gymnastics, which I was not good at. I tried a lot of different things and I just always had that interest. But I will be honest, when I was at the high school age, I didn't really even think about sports medicine specifically as a career option. Like I didn't even know that it existed in the way that I know that it exists now. I mean, knew that there were team doctors and I knew that there were trainers and staff that worked with all the athletes. And I always thought that was really cool. Like I grew up in Southern California, so I grew up watching the Lakers, just full disclosure. So I would watch the Lakers and see the staff run out and help the athletes. And I always thought it was really cool, but I just never put two and two together when I was at that stage of my education. But I knew I wanted to go into medicine, something kind of in the healthcare field where I could help people. That part I knew for sure. I had toyed a little bit with the idea of going into pharmacy versus medicine. And, as a female, and I think it's applicable in this context, I had some some recommendations to that effect that it might be kind of quote unquote easier if I want to become a pharmacist versus becoming a physician. Both involve a ton of school, but the post-school journey for a physician is longer for the most part. So it was a decision point, but I kind of wanted to follow what my passion was, and I'm glad that I did. So that was kind of the first decision point I had to make, is what field of medicine exactly I wanted to go into. So I did know I wanted to become a physician. And then through my college years, there's a lot of just pre-medical requirements. You take a ton of bio and chemistry and all these sort of sciencey classes, which if you love it is awesome. And if you don't love it, it's just one of those things you got to get through to achieve your ultimate goal. So, I went to UCLA for undergrad. They have a lot of strong sports for sure, but I wasn't super involved in the athletics aspect of things. I did some intramurals and stuff like that, but I wasn't necessarily treating the college athletes or anything in that capacity at that time. And again, I played my own just recreational sports and kept that interest alive and was just studying a lot of the time, to be honest. And then the process as far as going from college to medical school is the first hurdle. So you have to take an MCAT, which is a test that you take to get into med school. Hopefully you do well on that, and then you apply to med school. You have to list all these extracurriculars that you've done, all your grades, get these recommendation letters, etc. So it's a process from the start. But again, keeping that end goal in mind, I think really helped push me through it and give me the motivation to keep going. And then again, full disclosure, because I want to be upfront with all of you. I had a lot of fun in college too. So I studied, but I also enjoyed my time there. And I think that's so important. You have 4 years, you have a lot of relationships that you build, a lot of friendships that you make, and those things are just as valuable as all the education that you get. So I enjoyed my time there. I actually met my future husband in college. So it was a fruitful social activity. But the reason I'm telling you all this is I feel like I probably did start to get a little bit more focused on the fun and less focused on the academics for a little point in time. And so just to drive the point home that, the studying is always going to be important and you don't necessarily want to lose sight of that too much. So when it came to applying to medical school, I applied pretty broadly, as most people do. I ended up going to a medical school out in Florida. So it's called LECOM, which is Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. And if people are not sure what osteopathic medicine is, I can talk about that more later. But, I didn't get into a ton of med schools, honestly speaking. So I didn't have a huge selection. When I was applying to college, I had a great selection because I was pretty nerdy in high school. But when it came to med school, it wasn't quite as vast of a selection for me. I'm still super grateful. And really, it just takes one, right? You don't need to go to 10 med schools. You just need to go to one. And it ended up being a really great experience, actually. So it took me out of my comfort zone from leaving California, which was home, going to Florida, brand new place, brand new environment. And the structure of my medical school there was also a little different. It wasn't all lecture-based, which I think is, pretty typical in the college years. We did something that was called problem-based learning, or PBL. And, some of you girls may be familiar with that, but it's basically small groups and you do all of your learning in that way. So you're not just being talked at by a professor, but you're actually very engaged and involved in your learning. And so that just really drove the point home of like that teamwork, that team dynamic. And I loved all of that. And I really learned well that way too. I still didn't know about sports medicine that much at the time. So, med school is 4 years. Your first 2 years is primarily just learning all the information. And then 3rd and 4th years when you get your clinical, practical rotation. So you start working in hospitals and start getting that hands-on experience. So I was fortunate enough during my 3rd year of medical school to do an elective in sports medicine. I was kind of just looking for something that sounded fun, sounded interesting. And then, I came across a doc that worked nearby where I was. He was actually down at UC Irvine. And he was a sports medicine trained doc, family medicine, and then sports, which is what I ended up doing. And it was just so amazing to see what that practice was like. He saw patients in the clinic. He was a gymnast himself in his former years. And so he worked with a local gymnastics club and would treat athletes there after work. He would go and, to the UCI basketball games and be on the sidelines. And I was just blown away that someone could do this and get paid for it. It just seemed like really fun to me. And the fact that it was a career prospect was just so exciting. So that really sparked my interest, I think, to go into the sports medicine field. And so from there, that became my new focus. And so I still wanted to do primary care. I really love that. And I still do. And I think there's a lot of value to that, especially with female athletes, which I think we'll probably talk about more later. So I went into family medicine, and there's multiple ways to get to sports medicine. as a physician. And so I opted to go family medicine to sports medicine. So I get that primary care background. And then on top of that, I have my sports medicine skills. So after med school, so we have 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, and then you decide on your specialty. So that was family medicine, which is 3 years of residency training. And then if you want to do a subspecialty such as sports medicine, that's extra. So it's 1 extra year for sports medicine after that. So 4 college, 4 med school, 4 of residency plus fellowship. Then you're finally done with all of your training. So then it comes time to look for a job. So when I was in the residency and fellowship years, especially residency, I definitely wanted to go to a program that had a sports medicine strong point that I knew would give me the good training and background that I would need. And I was very fortunate to do that. So I did my training at a Kaiser Permanente in Los Angeles. They have an excellent sports medicine and family medicine program. And then I stayed on there for my fellowship as well. So I stayed at the same institution for those 4 years. I had an excellent female sports medicine mentor, which again, I'll talk about more later. But that was very inspiring for me too. And so once I graduated fellowship, then I was in the market for a job. And my husband, the one that I met back in college, he ended up finding a job up here in the Bay Area, which is what brought us both up here. And so I was very fortunate to be able to work for Kaiser Permanente still in San Jose, which is where I'm at now. And then I work in both family medicine and the orthopedic sports medicine department. And around that time is when the relationship between Kaiser Permanente and the Santa Cruz Warriors was getting started. And so I was very excited at that opportunity to be able to become the team physician. And so it kind of happened in this, interesting pathway. It wasn't necessarily something I knew about from the get-go. Interesting enough, I don't know, a month or so ago, I was looking through just some old emails and I found a little bucket list I had written for myself when I was younger. I probably wrote it when I was in college, to be honest. And one of the items on there was to be a team physician for the Lakers at that time, but a team physician for a pro basketball team. And, lo and behold, this many years later, that's what I'm doing. So it's just a very cool experience all around. It's a long road, as you can tell from my story here, but definitely worth it. I love what I do and I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever be a doctor simply because of that schooling is wow.
It's a lot of years.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And there's a lot of stuff that you touched on that I want to circle back and follow up on. But first we'll go to Maria and just, a quick of how you ended up with the Warriors and in your position.
Kendra, you really want me to follow the team doctor who just spent like 10 years in college and crossed off a bucket list job from her list. Are you kidding? Amazing story. And so funny, like, when we said earlier, amazing women, literally amazing women. Such a great story, Dr. Patel. Well, I did not go to med school. I went to San Francisco State, similar to Jazz. I am a Bay Area girl born and raised. So I went to college at SF State. I majored in business with a focus in marketing. And I never thought that I would be in sports. I loved basketball when I was a kid. I watched it with my dad, and, growing up, it was a part of our everyday, but I never thought or dreamed that sports was in my future. I'm a first generation Filipina, and so I just honestly didn't think that was something you could do. I didn't think it was something for our backgrounds, and we joke all the time that, as a Filipino, you're destined to go into healthcare, and that I just don't think that I could have excelled as well as I would have wanted to. So I went into business, and I interned with the Warriors. I want to say my senior year. The end of my junior year, there was a job posting for an intern, and it was helping with game days. And I thought, why not give it a shot? I wanted to be in some kind of marketing for entertainment, and I thought this could be it. And so I took the internship, and it was better than I could have imagined. More importantly, I met some amazing people through the internship program. And I think the dynamics between the people, the culture, and just the energy in sports is something that's completely unparalleled, and it had me hooked. Sadly, there wasn't any positions open for me when I graduated. So I actually got a full-time job doing marketing and events for Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco. They were going through a complete rebrand of the square, and they were trying to turn it into a more local destination as opposed to more of a touristy place that it was so known for. So it gave me a chance to work on marketing and rebrand, and we worked on events. Well, at the same time, they were doing a joint partnership with Fairmont Hotels, and they were building fractional properties on their site. And so part of my job became helping to prospect for sales leads for their fractional properties. And that was my first chance at sales, or some taste of sales. And I found that I was pretty good at just talking to people and building relationships, and it became something that I had an interest in. But instead of going to get my real estate license, which, you know, people were saying, well, if you're going to do fractional property, you got to get into real estate. I made a phone call back to the Warriors because I just remembered what an amazing time that was in you know, my college career. And luckily there was a job opening for a group sales account executive. And so shout out to Chris Murphy, the president of the Santa Cruz Warriors. I interviewed with him and he gave me my shot as a full-time salesperson. And I had never done sales before, so it was a fresh start for me. But it was an exciting new challenge to mix events and sales. And I've been with the group sales team since I started, so going on 12 seasons now. But it was an amazing journey. And again, to Jazz's point, I've seen some awesome runs, you know, getting through championships and having just the best time over the last few years. So that's my path here.
12 years, that is impressive. That is amazing. And something that both Maria and Jasmine mentioned, and actually Dr. Patel kind of alluded to it. Dr. Patel said it's extremely important to balance the fun and the productivity that you have in college, which I completely agree with. And something that I think Jasmine and Maria, you really touched upon, so if you could, you know, discuss a little bit more on that, is the importance of internships and building those relationships. Because as Maria just said, she called someone up who she met years before, and they managed to give her a job. That's how I have gotten, you know, some of my jobs in my career as well. So in college, in whether it's business or journalism or so many other career paths, can you just talk about how important those internships are, how you can go about finding them? Because we do have a lot of college students with us here today.
Yeah, I actually have a funny story of how funny and kind of scary. My freshman year of business school, this is business school, I had a professor who, I want to say this was probably like the first week of school, and he looked at all of us and said, if you guys don't get an internship while you're in school, you're not going to get anywhere. And so I was like, okay, well, let's put our heads down. Let's figure out how we're going to get there. And really, you know, like I said, I'm a student first. I was a student first, and that was my biggest priority. You know, the fun of school, and getting the job done. But also I knew that I wanted to gain experience. I wanted to get my foot in the door. And really what I was so interested was in sports. And so the way that I approached it, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, was I really just looked for all opportunities that I qualified for. And as a student, a lot of those were part-time positions. Some internships were open. But really, I took the route of, you know, part-time, either game day staff, summer, you know, youth programs, you know, games with the Giants during the postseason. I didn't get to work with them during the regular season, but I got to, you know, tap into an opportunity that was specific to the postseason, and that was with media relations. You know, one of the things around exploring internships and new opportunities when you're kind of searching for what you want to do is kind of just feel for things. You know, I mentioned my first thing my first gig was really in the community fund from, you know, and that got kind of led to what I'm doing now. But I also got to experience media relations and public relations, and I had no exposure to that before really taking this opportunity. I remember before I agreed to it, I went to my marketing professor and was like, hey, this sounds like an amazing opportunity. I don't know anything about it, but like these people are, you know, wanting to take a chance on me. And what advice did she give me? She was like, yes, you need to take this, and you can do your research. You can look up and prepare yourself to be successful in even a situation that you may not know or may not feel like you're an expert in a subject or, you know, the field. The biggest thing is really just having a desire to learn and grow, and knowing that through internships, that's where you can really do that and prepare yourself for the workforce.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Jasmine. Internship and the chance to really test the waters over what excites you, right? It's a chance to get your foot in the door, to meet people, but more importantly, to see if that's something that you're excited to get up and do every single day. And you kind of take a leap of faith by picking a major and hoping that that's what you want to do. But until you actually try an internship, right, and you sit in those offices or you hear what's happening on the everyday, right, you don't actually get to know what that job really means. And so internship was so crucial to I know my own development, and I would certainly encourage that for everyone listening in today.
Women in the sports industry there's so many more of us than there once was, and it's continuing to grow. We've seen women become the first GMs of certain franchises this year in different sports, NBA, G League, baseball, which is really encouraging to see. But it's still a challenge, and I'm sure that we've all had instances where we've felt those challenges. And I want to start with Dr. Patel, but then open it up for all of you. Is just, have you ever felt below a male colleague? And specifically for you, Dr. Patel, in med school and getting into sports medicine, where you are working with a lot of male athletes, what was that experience like? Have you ever faced instances that have made you feel uncomfortable, discriminated against because of your gender, or just things that maybe made you say, do I really want to do this? Is putting up with this behavior worth what I want to do in my career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd say that the short answer is yes. I've experienced all of those things in different environments. So in the medical school phase, again, in the first 2 years, it's just a lot of classroom learning. And so fortunately, I cannot say that I experienced too much of it in that setting. It's, there's a lot of men and women in med school these days. And so it was fairly evenly balanced that way. But once I started my rotations, that was probably the beginning of that experience. And it's certainly more prevalent in some environments than others. So for example, on a lot of the surgical rotations that I did, whether it was general surgery, orthopedic surgery, those types of environments, they do tend to be fairly male dominant professions. So not only the attending physicians, but even the residents that you work with, even a lot of the med students, it's a lot of men. And I was lucky enough to be in med school at a time where there were already like separate locker rooms and separate call rooms to sleep in, but there was a time where even that was not the case. So women in those, in that environment would have to kind of share space with their male colleagues, which is, pretty uncomfortable. So luckily that was not something I had to deal with, but I can think of a couple of examples from when I was a student on my orthopedic surgery rotation. And, again, it was something I liked. It was exciting to me. It was, in the realm of the sports medicine aspect, and just a lot of injuries and bones and muscles and things like that I deal with all the time now. But all of the docs were men. All of the fellows and residents were men. And I think at that time as a student, all the other students were men, and I was the only female in that whole environment. And the way that the setup of that clinic was, it was just a large room, and all of us were in the room together, and as patients came, we just kind of grabbed one after another. And so typically speaking, you kind of go round robin, right? One student takes a patient, then another, then another. But, these were a lot of sort of type A, high-powered, kind of seemingly entitled men, even at the med student level. And so I had to advocate for myself to make sure that I got the same amount of learning, if not better, and I got what I needed to get out of that experience. And I mean, it's a little daunting at first, but you're there to do something, you're there to accomplish something. And so letting that intimidation or that fear take over, it's not going to help me in the long run, right? I'm going to lose out on that experience, and it may or may not even matter to those other people. So, I had to kind of tell myself that message, step up and take what I needed to get out of that experience. And, it's typically a 4-week cycle that these rotations happen. So by the end of the 4 weeks, that behavior was noticed in a positive way. And the people that were doing my evaluations, the attendings, they gave me, fortunately, a lot of positive comments about how proactive I was about my own learning. And I will say it's a balance, right? Like you want to be proactive, but you also don't want to appear like you're in their face too much. And, that's just not something that men have to deal with, which is crazy, but it's a very delicate balance doing those things. And so I got that exposure firsthand at that phase. I'll fast forward a little bit into fellowship year. So when I was doing my year of sports medicine. So I mentioned before, I had fortunately a female attending physician who was actually in charge of the fellowship that I was a part of. And she was a huge influence on me, in terms of my career choices and everything that I've done since I met her. So I was very fortunate to have had that influence in my life. And I think without her, hopefully I still would have ended up where I am, but it would have been a much tougher road. So I was able to learn a lot from her experiences. And I mentioned before about, with med school, it just takes one. I think with a female mentor, it also just takes one. It would be great if you had 50, but the reality is those numbers just may not be there quite yet. So it really just takes one influential, positive person like that to motivate you and to guide you in the right path. But to kind of go back to the question, Kendra, so I can think of two examples when I was a fellow. And it was me as well as I had a co-fellow, and he was a male. And other than this one female physician that I mentioned, all of my other, training physicians were men as well. Very understanding and supportive men, I will say, but nonetheless, men all around. So there was a patient that came in. He was like maybe in his 60s or so, came in for hip pain, and he was wearing jeans. And, I can't really examine a hip in jeans. You can't really move the leg around very well and get an idea of what's going on. And so typically we'll ask patients to change into a gown. So asked him to do that. And this man proceeded to just, while I'm still in the room, I was about to step out, and while I'm still there, proceeds to just undress, take his, pants off right in front of me, had no boxers or underwear underneath those jeans. So was in, commando in the clinic with these jeans on, coming in for a hip exam with me. And very awkward, very uncomfortable. I did excuse myself and sort of gave him a gown to cover himself up with. And then I came back and, did what I needed to do to keep it professional. But that was not something I was expecting. I'd never really encountered that before. So I was pretty shocked by it. And on retrospect, kind of offended by it. Like, I don't think that would be the behavior that maybe a male physician would have to deal with, or maybe they do. That's just typical locker room, whatever. But, I wasn't super comfortable with that type of interaction. And so that was one experience. And then the other was a younger gentleman, maybe 20s, 30s, I forget. Pretty active guy. He did a lot of bodybuilding and weightlifting and things like that. Was coming in with a biceps problem. I had seen him once before, and I thought it was a pretty typical interaction, professional and all of that. He came back, and I was kind of surprised that he came back because he had messaged me earlier saying that he was feeling better. So I wasn't sure why he was coming into the clinic that day. And he tells my medical assistant that's rooming him, actually, I'm feeling great. I have no problems with my arm anymore. I just wanted to come back and see Dr. Patel. And so I was like, okay, that's a little strange. I mean, he's young. It's just the whole vibe was just a very kind of awkward type of thing. And so I'm glad I got a little heads up from my medical assistant. So I wasn't blindsided when I walked into the room, but I was prepared. I kind of had what I was going to say, and again, kept it professional and protected myself in that way. But yeah, a lot of these just awkward interactions, experiences, and with talking to a lot of my other colleagues, I mean, everyone has stories like this, unfortunately. I don't know. Hopefully that eventually goes away. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I think knowing how to handle yourself in those situations is super important. Not letting that sort of fear or shock or intimidation take over. Knowing what your worth is, why you're there, what your role is there, that is so important to never forget. And that will then allow you to hopefully respond in an appropriate manner and keep yourself safe in the process.
Yeah, and you meant I had a female mentor as well who told me when I was a senior in high school. I think we were at a Giants game, and in the clubhouse, because it's an open locker room, and she said the same thing. She said, you might see some things that you don't expect to see as a 17-year-old girl in a locker room, but if someone undresses or they just drop the towel as they do, just be respectful, turn around. If they try and make a thing of it, just, be prepared for that. And this is how you're going to handle yourself. So I think it's extremely important. Multiple things of what you said, finding a female mentor who you can relate to, who can tell you those things that a man will never tell you because they don't think about it. They just don't have to deal with it. And just being prepared for those things. Now, some of the other, issues or things that women might face might not have to do with men getting undressed in front of them, because that doesn't happen in many careers.
Hopefully.
So yeah, hopefully. So for Maria, working in sales, I'm sure that there is a different kind of interaction that you might face in the workplace, in business. But what are some of those, similar yet different moments with your job?
Yeah, Kendra, you said it earlier. There's obviously a lot of movement that's happening, for women in sports, and it's fantastic. And you talk about representation, but there's still not nearly enough representation, right, of women in the sports industry. And while that's limited, it's even a more limited pool of women in sales roles in sports. So, my entire career has always been predominantly surrounded with men. And so, imposter syndrome was a real thing for me, and is, from time to time still a real thing, just this feeling of inadequacy despite all of your, achievements, despite my sales numbers, despite whatever it is that gave me the right to be at the table. You still kind of have this feeling of inadequacy, and it's hard when you're the only one in the room who may look like you, right? And in sports sales in particular, that's quite often the case for women. And it honestly was even tough dealing with clients. I remember quite often how many times I'd be undermined, right? You'd get clients who they would tell me, well, I want to go talk to who's ever in charge of this event, or whoever your boss is, right? And come to find out I was the one in charge of the event, and I was the one they should have been talking to, right? But just this assumption that as a woman in this role, or, a woman in an authority position, wasn't common. And so, you often have to deal with that, again, especially in sales, and it was tough. Luckily, I've found a really supportive group of women throughout, my tenure, women and just allies in general, who have really had my back to remind me of my own sense of confidence, remind me why I have a seat at the table, and to remind me that I'm great at what I do, right? Not just good at what we do, but great at what we do. And having that kind of support, I think, is so important in anyone's career, but more especially, I think, for women, right? Like, we tend to second guess ourselves a lot, to second guess what we do, whether or not we have the right to be somewhere, especially when, again, there isn't a lot of representation. So having a support system that's strong, that's consistent, is extremely important, both within your office and outside of that. So fortunately, I have some incredible women who, again, within the organization and outside of that, who have continued to support me in what I've done. And I can only hope that we get more women salespeople in there, more women finding their own voice. Traditional salespeople, I always thought, I'm not that. I'm not a traditional salesperson, right? So it was trying to find my voice of how I could be the best salesperson that was authentic to me. And that was through relationship building. So again, trying to be confident in who you are and being true to who you are, and finding a way that to get the job done without compromising that. And so it's been an interesting road over, again, the last 12 years, but definitely a piece of advice is just to stay as true to you as you can, because that deserves a seat at the table.
Jasmine, I want to ask you about, along those same lines, and a bit of working your way up into to the position that you have now, and facing maybe some of the discriminatory, actions or feelings as you're working your way up. And we've talked about internships before, but, and this is an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but when interning, when a college student, when getting into the field of sports business, I'm going to assume that is a male-dominated internship class, a male-dominated interest, just in general. So as you're working your way through, as you're in these internships, as you're establishing yourself, how do you kind of deal with that, possibly being the only or very few women in that environment, and setting yourself apart to, as Maria said, make sure people understand I am in charge of this, or I'm handling this, or as Dr. Patel talked about, being the only woman in her class. How do you just establish yourself amongst that environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kendra, I honestly wish that you were wrong. I wish that, we were at a place where competition was even, it was a level playing ground or playing field. But, it's true. And in a male dominated industry, where I am now, there are often times where I feel and know that it would probably be a lot easier if I were a male. But going back to school and business in general, business is also just a very male dominated field. I can remember an instance where during, you do a lot of group projects in business school, and one of the groups that I was working with had a very, there was a man in the group that was very just opinionated, I want to say, very outspoken. But at the same time, I looked at him and I was like, as am I. I know that I know what I'm talking about, and you're not going to stop me or overshadow me or do anything. So I always just reminded myself to maintain this confidence. That person actually one time moved my hand out of the way and was like, no, that's not how you're supposed to do it. And I looked at him and I was like, I can't believe you just did that. Like, I couldn't believe it. As a student, I was probably 18 years old as a student in college. And I was just like, this is where it begins. And so I don't want to pretend like this hasn't felt like an uphill battle. I know all of us women have felt that way. But to Maria's point of, looking towards, successful women or women in your corner or allies, men too, who have supported me along the way. One of my mentors is a male, and really got me interested in sports. But I knew from a very young age that, I was going to be one of very few. And I really hope that one day that's going to change. And I do believe that it will. But yeah, I'm probably talking super loud right now, but I just always had to remember that my voice is there and you're going to hear it. And I have to remind myself that, even if I have to repeat myself, you're going to hear me and you're going to know that I am just as educated, as knowledgeable as you are in the room. And we can keep going. We can keep going.
Well, you perfectly segue into the next question I want to ask you all. But first, I'm just going to want to remind all of our viewers and listeners to submit your Q&A questions. We're going to rush through this next part so that we can get to your questions, because I'm sure that there's a lot on everyone's minds, especially after hearing what everyone has to say. But yes, Jazz, really all of you segued perfectly into what my next question was, which is about mentorship. And as Jasmine was just saying, finding and using your voice, which can be very challenging. And Jasmine also mentioned, one of her mentors is male. I have so many male mentors because, as I think everyone here knows now, there's not a lot of women necessarily in this field. So it's so important to also have male allies who will lift you up, who will introduce you to people, who will make sure that you're not messed with. And if you are, they'll, be right there alongside you. But just opening up for any of you, what's something that you wish you knew as you were starting to embark on this journey into getting into this industry that you know now? Who wants to start?
Happy to. It's marathon, not a sprint. And I think that is so important. Again, my previous manager at the time would always tell me that from a sales perspective, right? Maria, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So take your time. It's okay if you don't get it right now, like you'll figure it out. And I think that applies so much to just what we do in our own careers, right? Especially, as, young professionals, our goal is to come out the gates hot, right? You want to prove yourself. You want to have your voice heard. You want to do all these things, and it's awesome. And I think quite oftentimes, you're met with the realization that it takes time. It takes time to establish yourself. It takes time to build relationships. It takes time to really understand the intricacies of whatever it is you're doing. And so I think just continuing to remind yourself to play the long game here, right? Like, always thinking ahead, just learning and how you can continue to educate yourself, how you can continue to grow and be the expert at whatever it is always going to be important, right? Always looking for the long-term benefit, not necessarily just the short-term. And I wish somebody had told me that when I was, again, a first-year salesperson, that it's okay if you don't get it right now, because you got some time to figure it out. But the moment will come for you.
I can go next. So I would say I wish I had known, or I wish maybe someone had explicitly said to me, knowing your strengths is so important. And that may be talked about more often than not, but along those same lines, knowing your strengths and owning your weaknesses too. I think it's tempting to kind of criticize yourself or easily hear critique from other people because you already feel insecure about whatever that thing may be. But recognizing it, owning it, and doing something about it will allow you to earn that confidence and own that confidence, kind of like what Jasmine, I think, was saying earlier. The confidence piece is key. So know your strengths, own your weaknesses. It's okay to have them, and it's important to have them because that's how you're going to grow. And then just know your worth. And it's hard to know that, I think, at, like in the age of college age or even beyond that. I think life experience certainly helps with that. But the way that you can start to learn that early on is to have a supportive group of people around you, whether it's strong women, strong men and women, mentors, family, friends, whoever it is. People that can be that voice for you when you can't be it for yourself, I think makes a really, really big difference. And when I look back, I had amazing supportive family. I have a strong group of female friends that I made in college and, I'm still friends with today. And we're all in different professions, but, we still manage to support each other and lift each other up. So yeah, I would say know your strengths, own your weaknesses, and know your worth.
All great pieces of advice that I wish I knew too. But the other thing that I would say is, and I don't know if this is a piece of advice, but just to, like, I wish somebody would just, or somebody told me that, my path was the right path and everyone's path is their own. Being, Maria alluded to, like, there's this expectation that we were, Filipino women would end up in healthcare. And for a long time, I thought I was supposed to be a nurse until the moment I stepped into a hospital and literally had goosebumps all over. I was like, this is not for me. And so lots of questioning. I wouldn't say doubt. I never doubted that I wasn't on the right path, but you tend to, it's natural to compare yourselves to others. I know sometimes I question, like, do I need to go to grad school? But then there's that friendly reminder that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I can gain experience, I can learn, and I can continue to be on my own path and still find a way to be successful, even though, my little sister may have a master's degree, and, my classmate, is a professional athlete, or, you know, doing bigger things. But at the same time, like, just to continue to remember that your path is your own, and that, with your support, with yourself especially, you'll figure it out and you'll end up where you're meant to be.
All great. I was like with the piece. I think I probably had that thought or something like that, definitely at different points in my lifetime. So we're going to go over to our Q&A now, and just a reminder for everyone, there's a submit portal at the bottom of your screen. Just click Q&A and you can type in the questions. They're anonymous, so if you're feeling a little iffy or embarrassed to ask a question, we won't know who you are. And also, this is an extremely safe place, and we want to help as much as possible. But we're going to go to our first question here, and we talked about, or you guys mentioned, okay, Jasmine, you grew up in a view, like you could see Oracle Arena, and you knew that. Dr. Patel, you talked about how, there are these just gut feelings of, that's what I want to do. And then you did it and you are doing it. So what's something that you think that your younger self, that dreamer, that person who says, yeah, I want to do that, what would they be most proud of you for now?
I think for me, it would be pushing past the doubters and doing what it was that spoke to me and that drove me. And that started with, like I mentioned, going into medicine. Even the decision to go into sports medicine was something that was met with a lot of doubt. Like, is that the right career path for a female, et cetera, et cetera. But, I kind of just pushed those voices aside. I said, no, this is what I want to do. So being able to push past those doubters and trust myself and get to where I am, I think is huge. And then just to be like a little more specific about it, I think there's two main events that have happened just in my sports career that have been super proud moments. So one is this, being a Santa Cruz Warriors physician is awesome. Like I said, bucket list item, so that was an easy one. The other one was at the end of my fellowship year, I got to actually be involved with the Special Olympics. They do World Games every 4 years, similar to the regular Olympics, and it's an international event. It fortunately was in LA, like right at the time that I was in LA doing my fellowship, and so getting to work with all of those athletes, and Special Olympics athletes are a whole different breed. If you've never interacted or worked with them, it's just an extremely special environment and full of positive energy, full of just amazing vibes and amazing people. So getting to be one of the main medical directors for that event, and be involved in that event as heavily as I was, it's something I am proud of and will probably be proud of forever. So those are two things I would say to that question. That's a great one.
I love that question. I think the dreamer me would be so proud of, honestly, just what I'm doing today. Like, through group sales, we have the ability to host different kinds of heritage nights, community nights, awareness nights. And so we get to highlight various parts of our communities. One of my most proud moments is helping to cultivate our Filipino Heritage Night. And again, I am extremely proud Pinay here. And so for me, the dreamer, to have that kind of responsibility, to have that impact, to have a voice, and to bring that into a world outside of my own, like, the younger dreamer me would be incredibly proud of the work that I think myself, my team, that the organization that I'm a part of is doing today. And so just to be one piece of that is such an awesome story to tell. And I know the younger me would be really proud of it.
I would say, the younger me was so proud that I made it. I made it to Oracle Arena, but I also made it to Chase Center. And while doing that, and in doing so, I was also able to give back to the community that got me to where I was, or where I am. I remember as young as 5 years old, I went to the public library and got to see Thunder read a book to me. And who would have thought years later that I would be able to run programs like that and bring those same experiences to the students of this generation. I also got to bring a community program to my old elementary school, a small public elementary school that would have never dreamt of having an opportunity like this. And I got to do that, and I continue to get to do that. So I think the younger me is just still cheering me on and is super excited that I've brought the other younger me's with me along the way.
So this next question, I'm really excited to ask it, because here we have a panel of, not only women, but women of color, women of different backgrounds, who are all very ingrained with the Warriors and Santa Cruz Warrior. And this question says that recently, Santa Cruz Warriors player Jeremy Lin got racist insults on the court. As women, there are some glass ceiling problems for us as well at the workplace. So their question is, what's your perspective to the racist insults to Jeremy Lin, and how to adjust your mindset when facing these kinds of things?
That's a tough question, and that's a strong question. And I'm not super active on social media, but you can't help but hear all of this stuff that's happening. And I would just say, I don't know if this is a piece of advice for Jeremy, or if I were him and hearing these things and just putting myself in his shoes, or just anyone's shoes who's feeling or hearing certain things that are noise. Is to just remember who you are, and like Maria said, stay true to yourself. And slowly learning to speak up about certain things that might be uncomfortable. You learn at a young age, when you see something wrong, you're supposed to do something and say something about it, but you realize that that's not always the easiest thing to do. So I understand that every day is a challenge, even with yourself, to understand and to speak up and hold your ground around certain things.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a great answer as well, Jasmine. So the only thing I would add on to that is, going back to knowing your worth. I think that's the only way to really be able to hear those kinds of things and not fully internalize it. And that's really hard. I don't think anyone ever becomes a full master of that, throughout your whole life. But when a situation happens, two things happen, right? One is that person has done something, and two is what you do in response. You can always control what you do in response. And that's really the only thing you can control. You cannot control what the other person is going to do or think or say. If we could, that'd be great, because then the world would be perfect. But we can't. So there's going to be haters, right? There's always going to be people that are going to say stuff, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's valid or not, that you just unfortunately cannot control that aspect of it, but you can control how you respond to it. And there are situations where it will be appropriate to speak up and respond and advocate for yourself or for whatever that comment is. And there will be times where silence is more powerful. And, that will be something you'll have to decide based on the moment and the situation. But you always have that control of how you respond to whatever that comment situation is. And that took me a long time to learn. I used to get very upset when people would say or do wrong things, and I'd want to get in their face and tell them why they're wrong and explain it to them. But just that unfortunately doesn't get you anywhere, right? Someone's set in their ways, they're set in their ways, and you're just wasting your breath at that point. So it's important to pick your battles, know when to speak, and know when silence is going to be more powerful.
Couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Patel. And, a mentor of mine actually said a similar thing as well, as, you got to control the controllables, and you got to worry about the things that are within your grasp. And so to your point, right, like also knowing when silence is more powerful or when it is time to advocate for yourself. But that's also why, again, allies and mentors and friends and support systems are so incredibly important, just to make sure that they help keep you true to who you are, and to show that you can handle any situation. And in those cases, sometimes it's just about continuing to prove who you are and shut down the haters.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I actually had a conversation with my manager just a couple of days ago about social media, and I know that a lot of the girls listening with us right now are in a big social media age, and as women in not just sports industry, but any business, especially ones where social media plays a big role, there might be people who like to come at you just because you're a woman. And I was talking with my manager, and he just said, remember, just don't engage with those people again, unless it's an absolute necessity. But also, and I think this is true in Jeremy Lin's case as well, he's very lucky to be in a organization with a lot of people who support him and see what happened was very wrong, in a league that understand that that's very wrong. And hopefully even outside of the G League and outside of the NBA, the people who you work with, if they hear something's going on, will be able to support you. We've talked a lot about allyship, and that's not just from mentors. That should also be from your colleagues. That should be from your bosses. That should be from everyone. And, really quickly, we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to get to this one last questions before we all have to disperse. So just quick answers for this one. But from what we've talked about, from what you guys know about each other, what trait would you say you all have in common that is needed in the professional workspace that we all are in?
From what I know of Dr. Patel and what I've seen so far here, again, you guys, I just met her like an hour ago, but from what I gather from this amazing panel today is grit and optimism. These are some feisty women, I think, that are willing to just work hard and showcase who they are, but they're doing so with a sense of optimism that they can impact their own communities and that they can do real change and that they can, put their stamp into something. And so from what I gather about this group, some grit and optimism.
I would agree with that too. I didn't know all these ladies very well before, but this has been an amazing panel. So in addition to that, I would say, again, confidence in yourself. I may be a broken record at this point on that, but it's so important. Confidence in yourself and knowing that you can make a difference. I think believing that about yourself will then push you and hopefully help you even inspire others.
I would say we're all professionals and we're all trailblazers in some way, shape, or form. We're all leading the way for each other, for future generations of women. And, for the guys that are listening out there, they're learning something from us too.
Yeah, That's a good point. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for being a part of this panel. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this conversation, and of course, thank you to Kaiser for being the sponsor of this panel and making sure that this very important conversation happens. So, have a great evening, everyone, and hope to see at least these panelists. I hope to see you guys all soon, someday, hopefully in person, and not over Zoom. So, everyone, have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Thank you.
evening. And thank you, Kendra, for helping us moderate. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.